You probably have a coworker. Maybe it's Karen from accounting. Maybe it's Dave, who keeps sending company-wide emails about the lunch thief. They're a little unhinged, sure. But you deal with it. You nod politely. You avoid eye contact in the corridor, and critically, nobody hits Dave with a rock. That restraint, that's civilization. And it is younger than you think, because for the vast majority of human existence, there was no HR department, no therapist, no psychiatric ward, no diagnosis, no medication, no quiet word from a manager. There was just a small band of 30 to 50 people, a fire, the dark, and occasionally someone in that group who started acting in ways nobody could explain. What happened next is one of the most revealing stories in all of human prehistory. Not because of how brutal it sometimes was, but because of how often it wasn't. Paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkaus spent decades analyzing Neanderthal skeletal remains and found something that stopped the scientific community cold. Evidence of long-term care for individuals who could not have survived on their own. A Neanderthal from Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, dating back roughly 45,000 years, showed healed injuries so severe, a crushed eye socket, a withered arm, extensive bone damage, that survival without sustained group support was functionally impossible. This was not a warrior who got hurt and recovered quickly. This was someone who required care for years, and the group provided it. The ancient world had something you might not expect. Compassion. Organized, sustained, resource-costly compassion. Before language was complex enough to debate the ethics of it. But compassion for the injured is one thing. What about the person who wasn't injured? What about the person who started hearing things, seeing things, behaving in ways that made no physical sense to the people around them? Here is where it gets strange and genuinely fascinating. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies, which offer our closest window into prehistoric social behavior, have documented a remarkably consistent response to what we would today recognize as psychosis, mania, or severe mental illness. The group did not abandon the person. They did not exile them. They did not, in most documented cases, harm them. They called a specialist. Every hunter-gatherer society ever studied has some version of this figure: the shaman, the healer, the one who knew how to cross between the world of the living and whatever was on the other side. And crucially, the shaman's primary job description in almost every culture was not healing broken bones. It was healing broken minds, negotiating with the spirits that had apparently taken up residence inside someone who used to be perfectly normal and was now standing at the edge of camp, talking to things nobody else could see. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade documented this across dozens of cultures in his landmark study of shamanism. The shaman was not a fringe figure. They were central. They were often the most important person in the group. And in many cases, the shaman themselves had been selected for the role because they had once experienced exactly the kind of psychological break that brought people to them for help. The person who survived the madness became the person who guided others through it. Think about that for a moment. In the ancient world, a history of mental illness was not a disqualification. It was a credential. Now here is where the archaeological record gets even more interesting. Bioarchaeologist Jane Boekstra and her colleagues have documented cases across multiple prehistoric sites of individuals with severe developmental and cognitive differences, conditions that would today be classified as intellectual disabilities, who lived long past the point where independent survival was possible. One site in medieval England, studied extensively, showed a young man with a severe developmental condition who had survived well into his late 20s, an age that required decades of deliberate feeding, protection, and care from the people around him. He had never been able to provide resources to the group. He was cared for anyway. The ancient world, it turns out, was not the pure survival of the fittest nightmare we tend to imagine. Natural selection is brutal at the level of species across millions of years. But at the level of a small human band sitting around a fire trying to get through the winter, something else was operating. Something that looked unmistakably like solidarity. But let us not romanticize this entirely, because the record also shows the other side. Forensic anthropologist Stephen LeBlanc and other researchers have documented archaeological evidence of prehistoric violence, including skeletal remains with blunt force trauma, bound individuals, and mass graves. Small bands under extreme resource pressure sometimes made different choices. The compassion was real, but it was not universal, it was not guaranteed. It operated within the same brutal calculus as everything else in the ancient world. What does the group need to survive? And here is where it gets psychologically interesting in a way that should make you uncomfortable. Because that calculus has not left you. You are sitting in a world with hospitals and medication and legal protections, and an entire professional infrastructure designed to separate the question of someone's mental state from the question of whether they deserve to survive. But the ancient wiring underneath all of that is still running. The instinct to categorize, to assess, to decide whether the strange behavior in front of you is a threat or a mystery, to figure out whether the person acting outside the group's norms is dangerous or just different. You feel it every time someone on public transport is talking to themselves, every time a colleague's behavior shifts in ways you cannot explain, every time someone at a party says something so disconnected from the conversation that you catch eyes with the person next to you. That flicker of assessment, the rapid unconscious calculation of what this person's strangeness means for you and the people around you, is the same neural subroutine your ancestors ran 30,000 years ago in firelit darkness, trying to decide whether to call the shaman or move camp. The difference is that you have context they didn't. You have a word for it. You have a framework. You know, in a way they couldn't, that the person talking to things nobody else can see is probably not being visited by spirits. They are probably experiencing something medical, something treatable, something that, with the right support, they can move through. Your ancestors got there too, just by a different route. They built the shaman. You built the psychiatrist, both of them standing between the group and the thing it couldn't understand, saying the same thing in different languages. I've got this. I know how to handle this. Come with me. The instinct to help the person who broke was not a modern invention. It was not a philosophical achievement. It was not even a moral decision in the way we use that word today. It was something older and stranger and more fundamental than any of that. It was just what the group did. And somewhere underneath the insurance forms and the waiting lists and the medication reviews and the gentle suggestion that perhaps you should talk to someone, it still is.